Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Before we jump into the show, I just want to thank my sponsors and collaborators. 3D Network Technology, reliability is our core value. Visit www.3dnetworktechnology.com. And Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetec, that's GENETEC.com for more information. We'd also like to thank the Change Execution Group and 360 Life Transformations. Visit www.360lifetransformations.com. We'd also like to thank Canadian Security Magazine and Omnigo Software. And now, let's get into today's show. Thank you for joining us for episode 119 of the Healthcare Security Cast, where we'll be looking back at the September 11th terrorist attacks 20 years later. Today, we'll be speaking with four individuals who were directly impacted by the terrorist attacks, which took nearly 3,000 lives and caused over 25,000 injuries. The first up is Ben Scaglione, and he's going to share his experiences from that day working directly in a hospital during the attacks. All right, so Ben, obviously you were working in a hospital when everything happened on September 11th back in 2001. What do you remember most about that day?
So I think there's two things that stood out the most for me that day. One was how empty the city was so quickly. Literally by noontime, it was a ghost town. Something I had never ever seen before. There were no cars on the road. There were no people on the sidewalks. The city, at least around the hospital, was completely empty. Very, very strange and eerie feeling to step out onto the street and see that. The other thing was talking to my wife and kids. So obviously, when it happened, people weren't sure what was going on. My wife had taken our two kids at the time out of school and we're home with them. And I know my daughter grabbed the phone from my wife and, she was very scared and crying and wanted me to come home because she feared for my safety. So those were really the two things that particular day that stood out. That morning was our quarterly child abuse committee meeting, which isn't the most pleasant meeting or wasn't the most pleasant meeting to go to. As I was leaving for the meeting, at the time we didn't have a TV in our command center. The only TV we had was in our break room, which happened to be around the corner from our command center. And someone was in the break room and mentioned that as I was walking out the door to go to this meeting, that a small plane had hit the World Trade Center, and that it seemed to be just an accident. So when I got to the meeting, we were sitting around waiting for the ED doctor to arrive, and all of a sudden all our pagers went off, and phones went off, and it seemed that it wasn't as it appeared. So obviously the meeting broke up and we all went back to our departments. It was at that point that our EMS department, so we had a EMS department that was run through the hospital employees that took EMS calls or took city calls, and 4 units responded down to the World Trade Center, again, thinking it was just a small plane that hit the building. And just as a side note, 4 of our staff lost their lives down there, and 2 others were injured as a result of the building collapse. So that day, as things were developing and we were figuring out what was going on, and then the hospital decided to activate its command center, that's when the second plane hit, and it was clear that we were kind of under attack. So at that point, we knew that it wasn't a small plane from our EMS people that were on site. So we kind of had a little information ahead of the news at that point. And then once the command center opened, I spent my day at the command center. What we decided to do as I was leaving for the command center was my assistant director made the decision, rightfully so, to shut down the hospital. So we went into emergency mode. We shut everything down. We took all our officers, which is a plan that we had put in place or designed a while back. All the officers stepped outside and were screening people from outside the buildings. The way our hospital is designed, there were 2 vehicle entrances into the hospital grounds, and both those we put up barricades and we were screening vehicles at that point, because again, we weren't sure what was going on or to the extent of the terrorist attack. So we were ensuring that they weren't coming to us or they weren't doing anything to us. So we were literally stopping vehicles at the time. We couldn't look under vehicles, but we were popping trunks and looking under hoods and inside of cars and turning away any car that we felt didn't belong. We also suspended, we have a parking garage underneath one of the hospital buildings. We suspended the use of that garage, again, not knowing what was going on. At that point, it was really just an issue of waiting for patients, and we waited for hours and hours and hours for patients to arrive. And to be honest, it wasn't until the end of the day that any patients at all arrived. And unfortunately, they all arrived at once. So what happened was a city bus pulled up, and it was full with patients. And then immediately after that, because we were the burn center for Manhattan, we ended up getting about 40 burn patients severely burned patients within an hour or within 1 or 2 hours of the first one arriving. So it was chaos in the evening, literally chaos, trying to deal with, and all this happened again at the same time, dealing with the busload of people that showed up and dealing with the burn victims that showed up. And we only had the capacity of 20 beds. We had some patients in the burn unit at the time, so it was really scrambling to set up additional beds for the additional burn victims that showed up. And that was the extent. We probably had 60 to 80 patients only. We didn't have a mass amount of patients, but most of the ones that came on the bus were treated and released. It was only the burn patients that ended up being admitted. Right after it happened, the armed forces scrambled F-16s to fly around Manhattan. And I think one of the most striking things was like every 20 minutes, or I don't even remember what the time sequence was, but they'd come screaming down. We were right on the East River. They'd come screaming down the East River and, to the end of Manhattan and circle around and go back up. And they were doing that on a regular basis, and they were flying low. So one of the things all day long we were hearing, whatever time that they circled around with the 2 F-16s, just, shooting by the hospital. They had, they were low. They had to be at maybe 1,000 feet, and we were hearing that on a regular basis for 2 days. It was different to hear that on a regular basis for those 2 days.
Wow. So approximately how far were you from the Twin Towers site?
So we were a good distance away. I couldn't tell you exactly how many miles, but we were kind of in mid-Manhattan as opposed to southern Manhattan. And there were a number of hospitals between us and the World Trade Center. So that was probably why we didn't get the number of victims that we thought we were going to get. But again, initially, the assumption was that there were a lot of victims, that there were thousands of victims as a result of the buildings collapsing. And in reality, that wasn't the case. And the numbers that they did have, at the time, the city decided to put them on a barge and send them across to New Jersey because they thought that the mid-Manhattan and upper Manhattan were all blocked with cars. Obviously mistaken. Obviously, the afterthought on that probably wasn't the best plan of action. And you know, when it was all said and done, and they redid their plan, so if anything like that ever happened in Southern Manhattan, because there's only one hospital down there, that they would ship people up instead of shipping them across the river. But on that particular day, the only reason we got the number we got was because we were the burn center.
Right. And I guess in terms of the day-to-day operations, how long was it? And you know, if you can't remember this, like I'll be a little bit specific, but don't worry if you don't have the exact recollection.
Right.
But how long was it until it was kind of back to business as normal post event?
It was more than a month. We were screening vehicles for probably a month after the event occurred, and actually a New York Times reporter was actually visiting his mom. I think probably about 3 weeks after the event, and actually wrote an article about us and a couple other institutions and the security services that were provided. He was actually very impressed with what we were doing. At that point, we had gotten, you know, mirrors so we could look under cars, and we were screening every car that came in to the two roadways. We had opened up all the entrances again, but again, we're double covering, making sure everybody was properly screened. We were searching bags, and you know, again, you weren't really sure even a couple weeks afterwards, you know, what the real extent of the terrorist attack was. So we were taking every precaution we possibly could at that point, and you know, making sure that our patients and staff felt safe. What was amazing to us, and we had in our plan, we had some smaller emergency management situations prior to 9/11. So we revised our plan several times, and obviously our plan in this particular case worked. So if I don't know if you remember, but when the World Trade Center towers went down, we lost cell phones because all the cell phone towers went through the World Trade Center. So what my staff did is they all came to work. It was amazing. They by bicycle or by walking, they all showed up to work, which was amazing to us. What we immediately did was put them all, you know, those that showed up to work, those we could reach out to as best we could. If anybody had a Nextel was the only service that didn't go through the World Trade Center. So some of our teams had Nextel phones, and we were able to communicate with them. But we put everybody to work. We moved to 12-hour shifts, and there was a lot of overtime over the next month. But that's how we did it. And kudos to my team for taking the initiative of just coming down to the hospital. I don't even think they thought about it. They just left their families in a time where, you know, you were unsure what was going on, and they just arrived, and they were ready to work, and we put them to work. We certainly needed them. One of the things you talk about in emergency management is how people would react, and you know, the assumption is that people would stay home with their families, and it was the total opposite for my team. They all showed up. The one thing we did revise and discuss after 9/11 was families and pets, as to whether we could house families or pets if we needed to, because if people were going to come to work and they had family members that had issues, or the family, you know, they just didn't want to leave their family members, you know, for any particular reason. We felt that it was important to think about those two things. The reality was there wasn't much we could do about it, but you know, we discussed it, and we tried to alter our plan the best we could. The other thing, you know, obviously that we discussed was backup communications. So we did a number of things. We actually put a TV antenna on the roof of the building, so we could get, instead of getting cable, we could actually get a TV signal over the air. And we obviously adjusted how we communicated to the officers, so that in the event that cell phones went down, there was a way for the officers to call into us to see if they were needed. We'd had some smaller incidents a couple of years prior, so we were pretty well prepared. I think we probably needed more barricades and which we, a year or so later is when the East Coast blackout occurred. So we realized back at 9/11 we needed more barricades and we didn't get them. So we were short again during that blackout. But it was really barricades. And one of the things we realized was, again, if these people were doing 12-hour shifts and they actually weren't going home, how did we did we really have enough housing and food for everyone, for the employees that ended up staying and working as much as they did, at least the 2 weeks following 9/11. I think those were the two biggest takeaways for the hospital.
And I guess just in terms of takeaways for yourself, or anything that you would share with with a security leader, just in terms of learnings from this, is there anything that you would want to share with the security leader out there, just based on your learnings from that time period?
I would say that I think the most important thing is training. Like I said, we had some smaller incidents the few years prior, and we really focused on training and reviewing the plan and working to see what fit best for us. So there were a lot of changes over the 2 years prior to 9/11, and a lot of training. And obviously, we felt that training really paid off. Our response was good. Our ability to lock down the hospital quickly was phenomenal. We did it within an hour of making that decision, and it worked out well. We had later made some adjustments after the blackout, but during that month of dealing with screening cars and everything else, we actually, I thought we did a very good job.
Next up are Joe Sweeney and Bob Casazza. Joe and Bob were employees of the New York Police Department during this time, and they'll share their insights as to what transpired and their involvement and the impact that it had on them.
When I was going to work, it was a little later than I normally would go in. I had something to take care of at home. I was on the West Side Highway in Manhattan, which is the normal way I would travel in back then, and I was assigned to the Midtown South precinct at the time, in the squad there. And I had my music playing the radio. It was a beautiful day, not too much different than today here in New York, but a really beautiful day. And just listening to music on the way in, I saw an emergency service truck, lights and sirens go by me, and then another emergency vehicle go by me, and I didn't really pay much attention to it because that's New York and it happens. And then I saw a Port Authority truck go by me, which handles all the bridges and tunnels and the World Trade Center. And then I saw a Department of Environmental Protection Agency with lights and sirens go by me, and I was like, something's not right here. And so I turned the radio on, the news radio, and they were describing the plane. A plane had hit the building. They were surmising it was a Cessna or some kind of small plane. Nobody saw it. The guy was on the scene reporting, and as he's reporting, he starts saying, "Oh my God, there's another plane!" And boom, you could hear the explosion. Boom, and right then I knew like we were under attack, and so I floored it and got to the precinct and got dressed and prepared to respond down to the site, which we did. And my sergeant at the time, his one order was we all stay together, and so we headed. There was 3 car loads of us. We headed down there and drove pretty much straight to the site. We stopped at the first precinct, which was right down the road, to check in and get some direction, whatever. And then continued almost directly under the building. And as we approached it, we're in the vehicles on the road. As we got closer to it, you could see it start to almost sparkle at the top, and then it just started to collapse, almost, heading towards on top of us, and we had to head in reverse as fast as we could to kind of not have the debris land on us. So it was pretty intense for a few minutes there. Just a surreal surreal experience. You know.
Well, that was, what I do remember, and Joe mentioned it, was probably the most spectacular day you could imagine. And I remember waking up, grabbing a cup of coffee, and I happened to be home. At the time, I was working as a lieutenant, and I was the commanding officer of a detective squad in Brooklyn. So folks who don't live in New York, Brooklyn is part of New York City, but for the rest of us who live or worked in the outer boroughs, the city was Manhattan. But I happened to be home at that point. At the time I was working, I used to like to work a sort of a 12 to 8 shift, so I could kind of get in, touch on what happened during the day and something that happened in the evening. So I woke up that day and I saw my kids off, and my wife took the kids down to the bus stop around the corner, and she had the TV on as usual, whatever was on. And like Joe said, I see them break in with the tower smoking. And the same thing, news reporters were surmising that it was a small plane. And then at some point, my wife walks in, and we're talking, and we watched the second plane come into the tower. So it didn't take a genius at that point to know we were under attack. What was difficult for me at the time was that I was living in Long Island. So Long Island, Nassau County, was a good 35 miles till I got to work in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. So I had to get ready, get dressed, get in a car, and head west. So I drove west, on the Southern State Belt Parkway. And what I remember about that particular day was that there was nobody else on the road. There were only, 1 or 2 cars heading west. All of the traffic was heading away from the city. And when I got into Brooklyn, you could see, if you came along from the Southern State to the Belt Parkway, you could see all the smoke bellowing up into the sky. So a little different perspective, because I was still quite a distance away. And Joe will remember, anybody on the police department, when we came through the police academy, everybody got with all your other equipment. You got this little mobilization card that you didn't really know what it meant, but you had it in your wallet, the first couple of years. And I don't think I was mobilized for the first 15 years of my career, not in a manner as what was about to happen that day. Because when I did make it to my precinct, which happened to be the borough for Brooklyn South, I was tasked with mustering up guys, setting up a detail, and then heading down to downtown Brooklyn, where we were assigned, which is Metro Tech, which in New York City is the 911 center. It's where the 911 hub is for New York City.
Once the building was down, we had been told when we stopped at the first precinct that they were sending the detectives over to this shape up place to on the east side of the Lower East Side of Manhattan to get our assignments, what we would be tasked with doing. So, and again, the sergeant, I credit him with saving our lives, really, because I know the group that I was with would have without a doubt been running into that building and looking to do something, because it was just such a like I said, just an incredible, you just wanted to help and respond in some way. It's in our nature to do that. But he insisted we all stay together and we follow the assignment that we were given. So the building comes down and we head over to where we were supposed to be. And, at that point, it was still, there was an army of people covered in gray dust, walking away from the tower, from the World Trade Center site. The second building hadn't come down yet. And we were kind of standing around waiting for the leadership to get there and kind of give us our next step of what we're going to do. And it was surreal. As a matter of fact, there was a couple of kind of crazy moments. One, this guy who was dressed perfectly in a suit, briefcase, like if he didn't have gray dust covering every inch of him, he would have been like impeccable, you know, with his briefcase, looked like a typical Wall Street person. And a photographer, a news photographer, went right into his face and took a picture, you know, and because it was people covered in dust and people who were just watching and like nothing was going on, you know, they were fascinated with what was going on. So the guy took the picture of him right in front of his face, got really close to him, and he just stopped and he said, "You fucking parasite," and he just started punching the crap out of the guy with the camera, you know. And it was just a odd moment, and we had to break up that fight, which was weird, you know. And then right after that, the second building came down, and then leadership from the detective bureau showed up, and we were each given an assignment to respond to hospitals to start investigating, you know, victims, survivors, that kind of thing. So I was assigned to a hospital a little uptown from where we were, Upper West Side, actually.
And I think you have to keep in mind, when I look back now, and you know, and I try to remember different parts of that day and put it into perspective. And maybe because we probably suppress stuff normally anyway, you know. But if you remember how that was unfolding, you hear Joe say we were waiting for leadership to get there, and there was some issues with direction, because I don't think we've ever faced anything like this. And in many cases, some of the leadership were not in a place to offer direction. In many cases, I know when I was just getting to downtown Brooklyn, we had gotten word, or it came over SOD, which is a special operations channel, that the chief of department had been lost in that particular collapse. And it was in fact true. It happened to be the chief of department from the fire department. It was not our chief of department. So there was this feeling there was a vacuum, or we've had some leadership issues. Clearly there were communication issues, but you know, the feeling that I had from my perspective, and I think it's because I was 35 miles away when this incident began, was an overall feeling of helplessness. And if you're somebody that wants to get involved and wants to help people, there's nothing worse than you're far away. And then when you do get to a point where you're anxious to jump in, like I said, I ended up mustering with several other lieutenants and captains, and we must have had 150 detectives and cops on the Brooklyn side of the bridge. And Brian, I don't know how familiar you are with New York, Brooklyn, and Manhattan, but picture us we're on the Brooklyn side of the Brooklyn Bridge, down by that area where Manhattan is. So we're on the other side of the East River. And the concept at the time, if you'd go back in time and you understand this is all very fluid, we don't know what's happening. And the idea was, I guess, for us to muster up in Brooklyn, wait for the next shoe to fall, and obviously try to protect what was a very sensitive area, which was on 9/11 and the way we were going to be able to communicate 9/11 operations, 911 operations. I'm sorry for confusing 9/11 and 911, our 911 capabilities. And what made you feel even more helpless, because keep in mind, if you look at the map of the city, we were right there on the Brooklyn side. So we were about 3.5 miles perhaps from ground zero, where the buildings have come down. And I could tell you, you talk about the weirdest thing, I'll never forget this. We were being showered, coming down with papers from the office, buildings, people who had offices on the upper floors. And if you ever been near a campfire where you see soot and black ash coming down, this is on the other side of the river, probably 3.5, Joe, probably 4 miles, something, right, from the financial district in Lower Manhattan.
Well, Bob, not to interrupt, but you were talking about the communication system, and the one thing, if as you're speaking, I'm starting to like put myself back in those moments, and I think what sometimes when I hear these stories sometimes gets missed is what we were feeling at the moment with. We didn't know, we were getting over the radio, over our police radios, that about the plane in Pennsylvania, about the Pentagon attack. And so we didn't know if there was going to be other planes coming, like you just didn't know what was going to happen. You didn't know there was speculation, probably not official, but speculation at that moment that there may have been bombs planted in the World Trade Center that brought it down. So we didn't know if this was an orchestrated attack that would have had some ground element to it. And so there was a lot of speculation, anxiety, concern. The moment, and the reflection on it is overwhelming to think about, just what exactly happened. But in those moments right after the attack, we really didn't know what was coming next. And, we were looking for, military air support to sort of put a bubble around us so that we could continue to, work on saving people. But there was a lot of concern that this was, a multifaceted attack, and we just didn't know. So that was in the ether, so to speak, of everyone who was involved in the response, at least the people I was with. What else is out there?
Right, you're correct. And that's why when I say we're at Metro Tech, we initially were mustered in front of the location, and we were able to then move adjacent, and they had the area swept because there was concern that this had been, like Joe said, more of a multifaceted thing, that there was a secondary devices there or something which meant to A, blow up the building, or B, strike, responding personnel. So, but that overall feeling of helplessness is what I still think about today, being in a position where I was still far away from where I felt I needed to be. But it is a paramilitary organization, and there's times where you have to respect those decisions. And the reality is, at that point, many of the people who were on the Brooklyn side, I don't think we're in a position to provide much help at that point anyway. And when I finally got to that, when I finally got to ground zero, I still had that feeling, that overall feeling of helplessness. We all wanted to do more, and I think we all felt we walked away feeling a little unfulfilled in that manner, because there was little for us to do at that point once the buildings had come down.
I think it's like I said, most of the detectives I was with, not just from my precinct, but from the other Manhattan commands, were spread out to different hospitals to do investigating, and I think, that feeling of helplessness spread to the hospitals as well, because they all plan to, to initiate care of people coming in response to mass casualty event. And there really wasn't much of that. And so it was very disheartening, because I know for the people that when I was working at Bellevue, they still talked about it when I went there, is how they prepared, how they got everything geared up to handle what they assumed would be a mass casualty event. And it just wasn't, it was kind of sad for them, because they're the same type of people. They want to do something, they want to help people, and it felt there was an emptiness to it. I can say that I was in a hospital where people actually did go there from the site, and the one story that I'll never forget, there was a few firemen and policemen, but there was a group of daycare kids there was a daycare center in the World Trade Center. And this van, and I only know this because I was assigned to the hospital. This minivan was going by the World Trade Center right after the attack. They just happened to be, traffic was still flowing at that point. And a policeman flagged them down, stopped them and said, and threw all these kids and the daycare employees pushed them all into this van and told the guy, go as far north as you can and bring them to a hospital. So, and then I couldn't tell you who that officer was, but he ran right back into the building. And so, he may not have made it. I don't know. And it's just, it's one of those stories that sticks with me. That, there's probably a million of those,
And that was the other piece too, Joe. If you remember, like everybody you were with, I mean, you could have been mustered with 150 people, and cell phones were not quite as prevalent as they are today, but people had cell phones and different ways of reaching out. This isn't the Stone Ages; it's 20 years ago, but by then people were very concerned, and they're talking about guys and girls on the job, people we all had friends, family, acquaintances, co-workers, people who were unaccounted for, at least maybe temporarily. So there was a lot of that going on too, a lot of personal conflict amongst just merely trying to do your job. That was, a big part of, looking back. There were people who I mustered with and mobilized with in Brooklyn. And we learned within the coming days and weeks that these people lost brothers and sisters and people from their family. So there was a lot of personal angst for many of those people who were responding, not just because they were cops and that was their job, but they knew they had people sort of, in precarious positions as well. So that was kind of a weird thing. But Joe, you made a great point about the hospital campuses, because I remember that as well. We had to deploy guys to every hospital in Brooklyn thinking, wow, Manhattan's going to be overwhelmed and all these folks are going to be walking across the bridge and there's going to be so many people in need of medical care. And you're right, the groundswell never came. I think we had 2 people with bumps and bruises made their way into Sunset Park. And that's when, like Joe said, you knew that this was not going to be, there's not weren't going to be a lot of happy endings at that point.
That's an interesting point about the cell phones. They didn't really work. So the tower, I guess it was a cell tower in the World Trade, plus everybody trying to call everybody for whatever reason. Like even if you had a cell phone, it was difficult to work. So we were using, we'd go into a store and use a landline. It was the only way we could communicate with, to get a call to home, tell them you're okay. I have a lot of family who are firemen. Thankfully, they all survived. But it was a lot of, anxious moments trying to get updates on me personally, my family who were involved in the FDNY, but friends, colleagues, people a lot of guys I grew up with, who were in law enforcement. So it was getting those updates from home. They would be collecting this information, and whether it was home or at the precinct, somebody, making sure, that you've heard from somebody, or and then as the hours went by, it was who hasn't been heard from. And unfortunately, after a certain point, the people, we found out later on that we weren't hearing from them, was a reason for it. So really difficult overall. And I consider myself lucky because, like I said, I have a lot of firemen in my family, and luckily they were all safe. So I didn't go home for a week. So I was 7 days in, and my wife's finally like, I have neighbors who are firemen and cops, and she's like, everybody else was home the next day. But I just couldn't. I had trouble pulling myself away, and so one day kind of led into the next. One of the areas that I went to was the morgue, which is actually, if you're familiar with Manhattan, it's on the east side, 33rd Street, and right near Bellevue. And there was a lot of action, a lot of activity at the morgue. Very difficult place to work. They assigned a captain there who was, and I don't know his name, but he was did a really good job at, people would be random. The first day I was there, nobody was really assigned. It was just, we just went there and were helping. And then after that, people get assigned there, but not everybody was a good fit for that kind of work. And the captain kind of let them, for those that couldn't handle it, let them slide. But it was a very difficult, challenging place to be, because there was, you can imagine, not just people, dead people, but a variety of pieces of different things would come in, and you'd have to categorize it, similar to what went on at the landfill of just trying to identify anything that might have DNA on it, or anything that might identify a victim. Really difficult place to be at that time. So.
Yeah, and I think, Joe, if you remember too, because I don't remember either. And in fact, I look back and all those days, you're right, seemed to meld into one. And if you recall, it was shortly thereafter, everybody was doing 12-hour tours. So if you're doing 12-hour tours and you lived outside the city, by the time you got home and got any rest, if you were able to sleep after what was going on, you were right back anyway. So many times it made good sense to kind of bring a couple of days, change your clothes, shower at the precinct or whatever the case may be, and then try to make yourself useful. And making yourself useful, it could have been any number of ways. And you have to look back and say, well, I was performing a necessary function. And like Joe says, not everybody can do those things. Not every cop or detective would have been able to handle the what needed to be was some sort of an emotional detachment, which sounds crazy, but you want to be able to remove yourself from the personal, the very deeply personal aspects of working in the morgue. And it was a horrific place to be, because most of the remains that were brought to the morgue, it was something you would never see again in your lifetime, and you never want to see again in your lifetime. I was just thinking, yesterday or today was in the paper, and the gentleman who was the commissioner of the fire department, you remember his Joe Van Essen or something?
Yeah.
And he said something in the paper today or yesterday. He said it's some kind of event. He said, it's true, never forget. Everybody uses that terminology, never forget. But he says, who would want to remember?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is true, because like I said, you try to suppress a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. The way you put it was perfect. I think, like, you want it to be useful. And I, myself and another colleague thought, what's the one place nobody wants to be and where we could be the most useful? And that's why we ended up at the morgue. Because that to us was that definition, and it's, and then you ended up doing a bunch of other things, but it was a mix of just horror and bizarreness, rolled into everyday life, that I still, when I think of certain things, I still can't believe it. I was heading back to the precinct. It was in the middle of the night, and I hear lights and sirens. I look up, and it's a Miami-Dade police car responding to a job in my precinct. And it just, for a New York City cop, it was just bizarre to see that. But that's what it was like. And the one thing I wish people could remember is the feeling of solidarity in the country, and what was, and I wish everybody could get a glimpse of that, because I think people who are alive and were around, and they've forgotten it, and there's a whole generation of people who weren't even born yet. And not to go down a side road here, but it's one of the things that I was leaving. This was September 12th, and we were leaving. There was a group of us from the precinct. We hitched a ride in a marked NYPD police van, and we're pulling out of the west side, out of Ground Zero, and past the first, past the blockade where they had blocked it off. And just as we're pulling out, we hear there's a crowd of people. We hear cheers, and we all of us look back. We thought, oh, there must be like a celebrity or somebody behind us. We had couldn't even comprehend what was going on, and then we started to realize, people are on the West Side Highway holding up signs for us, and it was pretty weird. And
and they were there for a while too, Joe. They were there lining up for a while, and people were anxious to help. And it was a little uplifting when you had to do that kind of work and go back to such a depressing place. It was a little bit, it was uplifting. And you're right, different day and age. This is before social media, I guess, too. It was a place where everybody came together, and it thank God for that, because it like I said, it was uplifting, as temporary as it was.
We could have used a podcast back then, though. That would have been useful, right? Right, Brian?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely strange time. And then, what you said too is those couple of days, I still look back and I remember almost, it's weird because I had a personal connection to that little area, because when I was a young adult, my first jobs were in the financial district. I spent 4 years in Wall Street, and my wife worked in a Wall Street firm when I was dating her, and did quite a few events in the trade center. And when I was engaged, we celebrated Windows on the World, which was the upper floor, the top floor of the trade center. And I spent many a Friday night down there after work, blowing off steam. And then I would go back to my home in Brooklyn, which was in Bay Ridge, and my home was down near the Verrazano Bridge, which is near the Narrows, and where Saturday Night Fever was filmed, by the Verrazano Bridge. But the trade centers, the towers were a part of the landscape, of my childhood. So it was just crazy when you think of all that. And when I first saw it, I almost wanted to slap myself. When you pulled up and you saw the destruction and you saw the skeletal remains of the outside of the steel of that building, it was something out of a movie. And to this day, that's the one that, like I tell you, I must suppress a lot of this stuff, but some of this stuff is seared in my mind. And that's one vision that I can never get out of my head, no matter how hard I slap myself.
I'm still trying to figure out, what point did you say, this stock thing, I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to join the police department.
Yeah.
Like, All this
Yeah.
financial money stuff, that ain't
Yeah.
for,
Well, it shows you how sharp I was.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the whole, again, it's one of those, surreal gets used a lot, but it's appropriate because it looked like a movie, you know. It looked like a movie, and in the days, I was just with one of my best friends, graduated high school together, went into the police academy together, and he was one of the guys that I hadn't heard from, and I was walking down. I'm pretty sure it was the 12th. I was walking down towards Ground Zero, right next to what Bob's describing with the skeletal remains of the World Trade Center. And my friend's a very tall guy, about 6'4", and I see this guy with sergeant stripes. He was a sergeant directing traffic of cranes and iron worker gear, equipment. And it's him. And I was like, oh my God, you're alive, and that's kind of what the days and hours following that was like. You'd run into just, people that you didn't know, and you didn't even know to even how to figure it out if they were still alive. It was, like communication was tough, and and it was a long time before, it seemed like a long time before we knew exactly who was a victim and who wasn't. So it was, again, there's as we talk about it and I think about it, it wasn't just the events you see on TV, and it's that emotional angst from not knowing if this is going to be a sustained thing where you're going to be attacked, to not knowing who perished and who was a victim, and that seemed to last for forever for me.
Yeah, and you know what? You could make some parallels to healthcare and emergency management, because we talk about responding to emergencies. This was one of the craziest things you ever see. It was like showing up on the scene of a James Cameron movie like the Titanic, like the most expensive special effects you've ever seen, crushed emergency vehicles, dirt everywhere. The building, which was a zillion stories high, is now pulverized and in a pile, and flames burning from underneath, and the smell of all that, which you'll take with you for the rest of your life. But all of that, and it was great, right? Couple of, not great, don't get me wrong. I'm saying a couple of days later, the initial surge of help me out when you adrenaline, just trying to get through those couple of days, and you wanted to do more and more and more, and you felt like you just were not satisfied. You were not getting to where you needed to be. You had to come to the realization we were not going to change what happened, and there were not going to be a whole lot of people miraculously rising from the ashes. And it was clear that this was going to be a long haul. And Joe mentioned, you had to, we had some ugly assignments. If you were in the detective bureau, you were going to be either assigned to the morgue, or we were going to send guys every day to Staten Island, to the landfill. And that landfill was a tough job. You had to, they brought just dump trucks of debris, and they had to pretty much dump it out in a large swath of land like a football field. And we would line up in our Tyvek suits and have to rake through it. And you would rake through it, and you would how many times I come across something and I say, the last thing you wanted to do was be haphazard doing what we were doing, because somebody was hoping to find anything, a bone fragment, a piece of flesh that hadn't deteriorated, in that environment with all that moisture and heat, so it was so difficult trying to discern what what was real or what was imagined in your head, because whether you had some sort of insulation, some sort of a building fragment, it was very difficult, Joe. And you wanted to keep it moving. We had to do what we had to do, and we had a lot of work in front of us. And but you also had to go about your business in a manner that you had to be very thorough, because somebody depended upon you. So that went on for a long period of time.
Yeah.
So this was not something that just happened and we moved on from. It was that was a long haul, and that was months worth of landfill and morgue activity for a lot of the investigative guys.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. You didn't want to get it wrong. You didn't want to miss something, because you're talking about, and that's what ended up happening. They would identify people from a fragment, and so it was painstaking, and how do you the focus, and those were 12-hour shifts too, and the focus of trying to get it right for that long, doing that, it was just, again, it's the smell, the task that you're given, it's hopeless. It's a hopeless thing in a sense. I always had the feeling of despair of being at, I don't know if it was because I was on Staten Island, but no offense to Staten Island, but being in that environment, just when you started to think about what you're there for and doing, and you wanted to get it right, but it was kind of sad to have to do it, and that was always a challenge. And the morgue was difficult too, but in a different kind of way.
Yeah, and it's an extension of that helplessness, like I was saying. I mean, you're doing the right thing, but if you spent 12 hours out there that day and you didn't feel, and you never want to reduce this to some kind of crazy, this is not a treasure hunt or anything of that nature, but you'd like to walk away from your day feeling successful, that perhaps something you found would bring closure to somebody. And sometimes you just, again, it was that feeling like, gee, I don't feel like I'm doing something good here. You knew it was a necessary job. It certainly wasn't a pleasant job.
Right. Well, yeah, it was a day that changed our lives as we know it forever. And, I appreciate you guys taking the time to recount some of that and share your insights, because it's, again, the view that a lot of folks don't really understand of, what actually transpired that day. So thank you again. I do really, really appreciate it.
Hey, Brian, thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate the opportunity to share, and thanks again.
And finally, we'll conclude with Gisclerc Morisset. Gisclerc, at the time of the 9/11 attacks, was not working in the security industry, but felt a level of personal responsibility to make a difference after he lost his friend in those attacks. And now we'll hear from Gisclerc. I'm joined now by Gisclerc Morisset, who got involved in the security industry because of some of the events with 9/11. Gisclerc, can you talk to us about that?
Yes, definitely. I'm good to be speaking with you again, Brian. As you said, I got involved in security due to 9/11. At the time, I was unemployed, actually in between jobs, with a background in marketing and sales. And during that, that day, I happened to be at home, hadn't turned on the news until after the first plane hit the towers. So, just like everybody else, totally awestruck, couldn't believe it. I thought it was like a movie. So, getting with my family, calling people just in disbelief. And it wasn't actually later in the day where it finally struck me that I personally knew someone who worked at the Twin Towers. So a very good friend of mine, a college buddy of mine, his name is Balewa Backman. He worked for one of the companies in the North Tower. And I remember he never really talked about, working at the Twin Towers. There was always the company that he worked for and, the people that he met there and his experience there. And I remember one time we were coming home from bar hopping on a weekend, and we went through, the train station that was under the towers at the time. And he took us through the lobby of the building, and he used his employee badge to swipe in through, the access. And that was like him saying, hey, I work here. So it wasn't like too big a deal for him. He never really bragged about working there. So it wasn't forefront on my mind when, the news came out of the attack. So, we were all in disbelief. People are calling, hey, anybody heard from Balewa? We called him B-Rock. It was like, hey, has anybody heard from him? Calling his family. And, everybody's just waiting, trying to get information about it. So after all of that happened, confirmation that, he was there, he was, and, he didn't make it. And for me, it just weighed heavy on my mind. And, not being in the security industry or the field at the time, just, searching for answers. I came across the book that the government put out, the 9/11 Commission report. And there was a lot of information on, what was done by the different agencies, police, firefighters, and, different first responders, and then their analysis of the event, how it impacted the people, what could have been done, training and that kind of thing. And one of the gaps that they saw was in emergency response, drills, and, no one can prepare for a building coming down, due to a plane striking it, but just basic emergency response from the teams that were there, the security teams and whatever fire safety people are on site. So that weighed heavily on me. And, since I was unemployed, and then during that time, the threat level in New York was really high and potential for another terrorist attack. There was a lot of openings in the security field, a lot of companies in Manhattan, a lot of major companies were ramping up their security operations, multitudes of what they currently had. So, I kind of saw it as an opportunity to dip my toe into that field and not necessarily save the day, but just be a professional, and to wherever I worked, do the best that I can if there was ever an emergency. So I started working, got into the corporate field, and I worked with Chase Bank, and not too far from the site. So that was, again, a shock just to see. At the time when I started working, you still saw the debris that was in that area. You could still smell, how all of that stuff that was in the air when I was going to work down near Wall Street. And just when you come in there, just realizing that, people are counting on you, because everybody's nerves are still raw. People are very stressed out. So it kind of, you have to take your job very seriously depending on where you're working. So for me, it was like, hey, this is my opportunity to help people out, and definitely to make a difference if something were to happen.
So obviously your involvement in the security industry was more about a feeling of personal responsibility and wanting to make a contribution to the solution.
Yeah. So I got into just the regular corporate security aspect, doing access control, checking IDs. I was fortunate enough to get recognized for my professionalism, and I was moved to the headquarters of JP Morgan Chase in Midtown Manhattan. I worked there for a few years, was able to plug into some training that they provided for the security team, anti-terrorism training, got to because of it is the headquarters building, you have, executives, board of directors, you have celebrities, high net worth individuals coming to meet VPs and that kind of thing. So you get to see different levels of security operations, executive protection, special events that they have. Chase sponsors the US Open, which is going on right now. So, security detail goes to the stadium and helps provide security there. So it was a very nice, for me, fundamental orientation and just on-the-job learning different aspects of security. And then from there, I just branched out, networked with a few people. I met a contract manager who actually had his own security training school. And he kind of took me under his wing, mentored me, helped me gain my instructor license. And then from there, I started branching out into training as well. A few years after that, I got into fire safety. And that was something that I was really interested in, because that was, connecting the dots for me, because that's where the rubber meets the road in, emergency response. And in New York specifically, it's called fire safety, not necessarily emergency response. So there's special training that goes along with that licensing. But it was at the time when I first found out about it, it was very difficult to get into that field, because it was really who you knew. A lot of people were referred in, a lot of firefighter, fire rescue, a lot of many of the major companies or companies that used fire safety, they were unionized. So it was very difficult to get into that system. So years later, I finally was able to find opportunities more with the hotels than with the corporate side. I got licensed as a fire safety director, and I got a contract job working at a corporation. And again, kind of got my feet wet. And a lot of that is just, monitoring the fire safety response system, monitoring alarms, doing trainings with the staff, what they call the fire brigade in New York, so that different people are assigned specific roles in the event of an emergency and evacuation, so that you have people to assist you depending on how many security officers you have working with you. You also have regular team members and staff that can help as well. And then from there, I got into hotels, which have a lot more strict regulations, especially in New York, in regards to fire safety and state regulations and guidelines on maintaining, the fire systems, your checks, your inspections, your drills. And that was really a great opportunity for me, because I received a promotion and was able to become the head fire safety director for the hotel. And, another big responsibility, making sure that all of the systems are in place, working with the engineering team and making sure that everything is working, making sure that all the inspections are done on time. So, sometimes you're working with people in other departments who are part of your response team, part of that brigade. They don't see it as, urgent or as important as you are. So when you do your monthly drills, people show up late or they don't show up at all. They don't execute the way they need to execute because they're like, oh, it's just a formality. And then you have to, kind of tell them like, hey, you never know, right? And this is not just for fire. We could use these in the case of, a bomb threat. You could use this in the case of active shooter. That wasn't the kind of thinking that we had back then. It was mainly just, if there was a fire or that kind of situation. But working with that team, if you have people who pay attention, you have a well-oiled machine of people who can react to any type of emergency.
And, I want to talk about your friend a little bit who you lost.
Mm-hmm.
You actually had a personal loss in the scenario,
Mm-hmm.
B-Rock. So he was a college friend, you said, 20 years ago, obviously a young man at the time. Did he have a family that he left behind?
Oh, yeah. He had, it was his immediate family, mother. He had siblings. He was pretty young, so he wasn't married at the time. And, he was actually older than me. I met him in college, and he was just a very outgoing guy, very friendly guy, very approachable. And after, we got to know each other, spent a lot of time in college together, and we both lived in Brooklyn, so Brooklyn, New York. And when I first came out of college, just doing a job hunt thing, I lived with my parents. On Fridays, I would just go home. So he and some of the other guys would call, hey, what are you doing? And I'm like, chilling, I'm at home. He was like, no, that, can't have any of that. So he would come grab me and then, put me onto the bar hopping scene. And, that was his kind of thing. He knew that I was job hunting. He actually helped me find my first job when I was doing marketing. And he was always that type of person, we were probably 2 years apart, but he was like a big brother to me. and, looking out for me. Hey, what are you doing? How many interviews have you gone to? You got to put a list together, just, making sure that I wasn't slipping through the cracks. So, I call him, brother from another mother. And, I got to meet his family before all of that. He introduced me to his family. I got to meet his sister. His sister had a child at the time. And, we all went to meet his new niece. And, it was really good to just, get to know this larger family. And again, he's not the type of person who brags about stuff, right? He always joked that he was like, if I ever made it rich, I probably wouldn't even tell anybody, right? And, he had a sister who actually was in the Olympics for track and field. And he didn't tell anybody, right? It's like, I'd be bragging to everybody. It's just, for him, he was, really, really a humble guy. But it was about, for him, it was just natural for him to connect with people. We call him B-Rock because he was into music. He was a very talented guy. Just about anything that he put his mind to, he can do. And he was working as a junior accountant, but he also had plans to go and get masters in biochemistry. And, he was a genius with music beats, and everybody tried to push him in that direction. It was like, hey, you could be, the next Dr. Dre, you could be the next RZA. So why are you doing this accounting thing? And it was easy for him, right? Accounting is easy for him. So it's like one of those things, what if, that hadn't happened, where would he be right now? Because the sky was the limit for him as far as his ambition. And when we get together and we remember him, we always say, what if? Because we know that, his potential was so high. So it's kind of a big loss to a lot of people.
Now, in terms of 9/11, what are some of the takeaways that you've applied for the last 20 years just based on those events?
One of the biggest things that came to me was, learning more and more about anti-terrorism, and learning what the FBI, CIA, what other agencies and what other countries do in trying to prepare themselves and trying to protect the nation and trying to protect assets from a terrorist attack, which is, there is no profile for a terrorist, right? You have to realize that it's behaviors that seem out of place, which you have to be able to pinpoint, which is going to tell you that I need to continue watching this, or there's something here that I need to report. So when I first went into that anti-terrorism training, that was one of the things that we learned, was that it's not so much a race or ethnicity that you should be looking out for. It should be what is out of place, right? If it's 90 degrees in August, about to be September, and somebody walks into your lobby wearing a trench coat, right, has on a baseball cap and sunglasses on, trying not to be seen, they should stick out like a sore thumb, right? So those types of things, when you train your staff, and one of the things that I learned is that other countries, they train not just security personnel, they train the public in this as well, so that everybody has that heightened awareness and knowledge of what can be a potential threat. So when you say, if you see something, say something, well, you have to train people on what they should be looking for. They say, that looks suspicious to me, and find the nearest police officer, find the nearest security officer, so that you can say, hey, especially if you're in an area where people know each other, you work in a building, you know who's supposed to be in there. Somebody walks in there and is not the normal delivery guy, right? And they're not doing the normal procedures that a delivery person would know. Hey, that's a red flag, right? So that's one of the things to me, and it now ties into what we just call now workplace violence, because, a terrorist attack, what you can call now extreme violence, can be workplace violence, and it's all about awareness, right? So if people are not trained to be aware, if they're not trained on what they should be looking for to get their spidey sense to go off, there's only so much security can do. There's only so much CCTV can do. There's only so much access control can do and panic buttons can do. you have more employees than you have, security staff. So we need everybody to kind of be aware. Don't have your head down when you're walking around, because there could be something that could have been spotted that somebody just ignored.
Absolutely. Well, and I know obviously it was a really negative event that happened 20 years ago. I'm glad there are some positives. For example, it's led to you going down a career path that obviously you very, very much enjoy.
Mhm.
But again, just thank you for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, again, the security field in general is not a high bar for entry, is relatively easy to get into the security industry. Some people kind of see it as a plan B, because for whatever reason, other goals didn't work out, or they want to get into, law enforcement or some type of government security. So they kind of do this while they work towards that. But there is so much in the security field. You have communications, you have loss prevention, you have emergency management, you have canine, which is an expanding field. Is so much, and companies need it more and more. And definitely, I welcome people. If you're a people person, if you're an inquisitive person, if you're the type of person who loves to solve problems, this is a field where you will excel in. And just like any other field, whatever you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. So, a lot of people may not know how fulfilling this field can be. I definitely welcome them. If you're on the fence or you're starting a career, looking at different careers, take a look at the security field, and especially healthcare security. That's probably, for me, probably the most fulfilling, because you're helping people, many people, at their most desperate need.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing, Gisclerc. I appreciate your time as always, and I appreciate the conversation.
Same here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for our Remembering 9/11 20 Years Later episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. I want to thank Ben, Joe, Bob, and Gisclerc for sharing their stories and helping us to remember the sacrifices made by many during that time. Let's not forget what a significant event this was in our history, especially for those of us who lived through it. I think everybody remembers where they were on September 11th, 2001. It was definitely one of those times that's etched in everybody's mind who was alive that day. Thanks again for joining us for this episode. The Healthcare Security Cast is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music and Audible, and many other platforms as well. Check out our Linktree on your computer or mobile device. And this can be found at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, BRINE, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. Or if it's easier, send me a text at 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have or share any links you may be looking for. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, take care and stay safe.